You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Good morning and welcome back to The Social Workers. You are listening to WCDB Albany, and this is The Social Workers, a monthly talk show in the Capital District of New York that deals with social work, community issues, and lots of fascinating topics related to that. My name's Eric Hardiman. I'm your co-host here with Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hi, Eric. I'm so excited for today's show for two reasons. The first is because we have a MSW student as one of our co-hosts today. Lamar Romeo is a second-year student in our Advanced Standing MSW program, who over the summer took our Media Savvy Social Work course, where he learned some of the skills for interviewing and being interviewed, and today he is here to sort of use some of those skills as we interview our guest. In his personal life, he is a certified substance abuse counselor, and he is also interning at our local agency, Northeast Parent and Child Society. My second reason I'm really excited today is because we have our guest, Ogden Rogers. He's a Ph.D., LCSW, ACSW, and professor and chair of the Department of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. His book, Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, Sideways Stories on the Art and Soul of Social Work, was published in 2013 by White Hat Communications. This humorous yet thought-provoking book is a collection of stories from his 30 years of social work experience. So we're really happy to welcome Ogden to the show.
Welcome, Ogden. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. So we've got three interviewers here, myself, Alyssa, and Lamar, and we'd like to talk to you a little bit about your career in social work, how you got started with this profession. Just tell us what you can about yourself and how you got interested in this work.
Wow, Eric, that's really that's a thought-provoking question. I hope I don't take too much time with the answer. I actually sort of came to social work. I was an undergraduate student as the war on Vietnam was just winding down, and I can remember that. While I was going to school, I was studying biology, and I was studying sociology, and I was studying political science. I had a vague notion of being a public health investigator in the early 70s, and I don't know how else to describe the time, but it was like I was pretty sure. Well, I also had a job working in a hospital as an emergency department paramedic, and I guess it was that job at the hospital, which was kind of a unique job insofar as I worked. I was the guy who took you out of the ambulance when you showed up at the door, but I was also the guy who wheeled you to the morgue if you didn't make it through the hospital system. So, as a young man, I had a real vivid experience of seeing the cracks that were occurring within primary health care in hospitals. And
right.
So I kind of made a decision right then during that period of time that was like, I don't think I really want to go to medical school. The doctors around me don't seem to see the cracks, and they're kind of, despite their best wishes, people are dying because they don't have any control. I also sort of ruled out law school because I didn't have that sort of black and white kind of thinking. And I guess serendipitously, while I was working in the emergency room, one of my jobs was I was supposed to sit next to people who were acutely psychotic and just try to do whatever I could do to keep them calm and not let them hurt themselves anymore in the hospital environment. And it's actually there that I sort of met the first person in my life who was a social worker. And actually there's a story in my book about how, I'm sitting next to this perseverant man who, no matter what I was doing, would you like a glass of water, sir? It would just make him angrier. Would you like a blanket? It would just make him angrier.
Mm-hmm.
And then this fellow came in who was the local delegate from the Community Mental Health Center. And he just sort of sat there and quietly watched the man for a little while, and then he started talking with him. And and he was able to engage this guy. And although the conversation initially sounded on both parts somewhat crazy to me, 20 minutes later, this person was calm, and he was walking voluntarily up to the psychiatric unit on the 3rd floor. And you know, when Morris, his name was, this social worker, when he came down, I just was so impressed, and I said, "Man, what is it that you know? How, you know, you obviously are, you know," I guess I was very much enthralled with his competence, and that's Morris turned around at me and he says, "Well, I'm a social worker. It's a social work thing." And that's probably where I caught the bug at that point in time. I recognized that the profession fit with the way that I looked at the world, which is kind of like through the cracks. I'm always looking at cracks and stuff. See, I told you it was going to be.
No, it's a great answer.
Way more of an answer than you probably needed.
Well, I think it just really shows what your book is about. And one thing I loved about your book was one of the opening pages in the beginning, when you talked a little bit about why you wrote the book. And maybe you can tell our listeners who might not have read it yet. But when you were talking about the old professor who you had written the paper for, and about the story of the man who died, can you go in a little bit about that? But I think that's a good. It will show our listeners really where this book came from.
Well, the book is actually entitled. The main title is Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, but I guess the subtitle is Sideways Stories on the Art and the Soul of Social Work. And I've always been. I've always enjoyed stories, and I think that one of the major ways that we understand the world and have meaning of the world is actually in the stories that we tell each other and the stories that we even tell ourselves. And the idea for this book actually occurred rather, again, serendipitously. I had done some work with the American Red Cross and the International Committee of the Red Cross, and some blurb about it had been published in the alumni magazine of my college and undergraduate school, and this fellow who was a teacher of mine many years ago, I had been in his class, I believe, on ethics, and he wrote me this wonderful letter after almost, I guess, 30 years, and he said, I've read the stuff that I saw in the magazine about you, and I just wanted to let you know I've never forgotten this story that you wrote in my class. And the story was a short essay about a man that I used to pass on my way from my apartments to the hospital where I worked. And you know, I used to pass this fellow who just sat on his corner on his stoop, and he watched the world go by every day, and I probably shared about maybe 2 or 3 minutes of time with him every time I passed, and we got to kind of know each other. And then anyway, one day I'm working in the ER. It was an evening shift, actually, and the ambulance, one of the ambulances came in, and there was this fellow, and he'd apparently died of a massive heart attack, at his home. And I was the guy who was, like, taking him out of the ambulance and wheeling him to the morgue, and I reflected on the fact that, here was this fellow that I passed every day, and we knew one another, and I had this, I guess I encapsulated it in my mind that he and I had shared stories, and now that he was dead, that, all the stories that he had sort of gone with him. And, I'm approaching a place in my life where it's like, well, I guess I needed to establish some sense of generativity. And when I was provoked by this letter by my old professor, it's like, oh, I haven't thought about that story for years. And I went to go find it, and I'm a famous pack rat, and I've kept probably everything. My wife she just rolls her eyes at me. But I looked all over the place, and I went through all my files, and I couldn't find this story. And I guess it was that consciousness that even my stories are starting to fade away, and perhaps I've I should collect them. And I've been writing stories off and on for various different venues for years. So what I started to do was started to collect them together and put them in some degree of organization. I wanted to write a book about social work and it's really, unfortunately, I have to use myself as sort of the foil throughout the book, but I really wanted to write a book about social work that wasn't a textbook, but it was a book that, social workers, and particularly young social workers, could read and start to get, some of the wonderful things that we do in our profession and how we do them. And I thought that perhaps my stories might be a way of doing it from around the corner, doing it sideways.
Well,
that's why I call them sideways stories.
Yeah, and we're so glad that you have written the book. It's quite popular on our social work campus. We have several copies in our library. But I like the humorous approach, but it's also that thought-provoking approach as well, because it makes you think, and you can also enjoy it while you read. It's definitely different from a textbook, but we're still learning from this.
Well, that was one of the things that I actually appreciated about it, because it was like that I was learning, but on the surface, I didn't necessarily realize it until I actually got through the book. It's actually a wonderful read. I have a question, and that is, why did you decide to use a more humorous approach?
May I call you Lamar?
Certainly.
That's a really wonderful question. I think the book sometimes is humorous. I think the book sometimes is also somewhat, pathetic, meaning, sometimes it's got some rather sad stories in it as well. I don't know. I guess my perspective is that I, like you and so many others, have spent an enormous part of my life reading research and empirically based science, and Lord knows I've given years of lectures of how we need to do the things that we do in the social work profession. But I just kind of felt that when we close our textbooks and when we close the videos and we just sit down and we have a cup of coffee and talk to one another, those are actually the times when I've probably learned the most about my profession. So that's kind of why I decided to write the book about stories, because I thought that would be the best way. Well, no, wait a second. I don't want to say it's the best way, but it's certainly another way of trying to learn how to do this very important work. And certainly, isn't history sort of filled with some great characters who have helped in their own little ways to change the world, and they did it by telling stories.
Yeah. You helped to actually change the way that I had thought about some things, and then you also made me think about things that I had never thought of before. And one of the areas of your book...
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you.
No, well, I'm not just saying it. I actually mean it. You actually wrote, always, like as a social worker, we're always having to think about two things at once. Think like a juggler or a surfer or any master of multiple dimensions in motion. Like, where does tolerance end and begin? What do citizens owe society, and what does society owe citizens? Can you elaborate more on this idea, which I personally never thought of in this manner, but find it to be both true and fascinating?
I would argue, since this conversation sort of began with meeting Morris in the emergency room, your question reflects back to, I guess, a consideration of how I think kind of the world, people in the world think, and I don't want to get too, dualist on everybody, but on one hand, I think there's a lot of people in the world who kind of think in what I call black and white. Stuff's either on the right or it's on the left. It's either up or down. It's either right or it's wrong. And while I certainly think it's important that there are bright lines in the world, and I'm kind of glad that people think in black and white, what I've noticed is that wherever you've got a right and a left, there's always still some sort of crack in the middle, and that's the kind of place where people fall through. and people become impoverished, and people become homeless, and people become crazy, and it's always in those cracks that are between the black and the white that there's human need. And therefore, I think social workers are the people who kind of don't think in black and white. We're the people who appreciate the fact that there's always gray, that there's always some sort of middle. So that's really kind of why I wrote the book in the way that I wrote it, was to illustrate this idea that the way social workers think, actually it's kind of lonely. Once you start to think like a social worker, you're going to find that a lot of people don't think like you. Social workers are always thinking about kind of like what's in the middle, and how do I join the people that I'm trying to help get out of the ditches that society has in some ways laid out for them. And so
I think you captured that perfectly.
Thanks a lot. Yeah,
we're all sitting in this. We're all sitting in the studio, sort of nodding our heads, like, yes, that's exactly. It's exactly
that's so cool.
Social work's an interesting profession, and it's one that's not always understood by the community at large, and it's one that sometimes I feel like we don't even fully understand ourselves, and I think maybe that's why one of the reasons why your book has touched a nerve. Another piece that really interested it...
Well, it's really hard to talk about gray, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and another piece that really interested me in your book was you talked about the principle of opposites, and I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit and what it means to think about opposites.
Well, the principle, in my career, I've had a number of opportunities to work in situations of crisis, in disaster relief and some other kinds of activities, and actually, it's kind of in those situations where stuff hits the fan and things are more exaggerated. That that actually it's easier to see things to some extent in black and white, and the principle of opposites is sort of like a mind vitamin. It's a rule of thumb that I keep in my head, that whenever you walk into a situation that's quite chaotic and you identify somebody who needs assistance, kind of the first, and you'll notice that a lot of people sometimes in the middle of crisis just get overwhelmed by it all. They try to process all the information in a disaster, and in doing so they become helpless and ineffective. And actually the good crisis intervener is somebody who moves into all that smoke and craziness, and you identify, where you can be helpful, and that's where the principle of opposites comes in. If somebody's wet, they need dry. If somebody's without shelter, they need shelter. If somebody's hot, they need a little cold. If somebody's isolated, they probably need some other people around them. So, I here at our university, we have a course on crisis intervention and disaster relief, and in that course, one of the things that I just sort of work with students about is learning that, move into the smoke, move into the craziness, and just remain calm and use the principle of opposites, and you'll probably always be effective.
And that's one thing I liked about your book, because it offered sort of not tips, but it did, as you're reading it, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I never thought of it like that. So I think that's one of the reasons, another one of the many reasons why your book, among students, faculty, staff, those in the profession, are really, they really enjoy this read.
That's really, again, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much. I have to tell you, at a personal level, it was quite a risk to write the book, because first of all, I'm going to be the first person in the world to admit that I've never really ever come up with an original idea. I've learned stuff from all of the great people that have come before me and the people who surround me in the world. And I felt I was really it's like, wow, this is kind of an arrogant kind of thing to do. But at the same time, I really also sort of felt that it filled a void in the current social work literature, and so I thought I'd take a risk and write it, and it's actually it's very helpful to hear things like what you just said, because it kind of validates, why I took the risk.
You had also wrote that this book is made up of stories, and it's about life and how life is made up of stories. And it is a lot of great anecdotes and analogies. You I don't want to talk necessarily about the woman and the cow. That was another great one. But as a social worker, you say that you have to go places in your mind that most people will never wonder. Can you talk more about having to go to some of those places?
Well, I guess that's part of my... I work at an undergraduate program, and so many of the people who come to school here are pretty young folks. They come right out of high school, and they're studying for their bachelor's degree in social work. I kind of want people to know. I mean, earlier I said that when you get to think like a social worker, in some ways it can make you somewhat lonely, because kind of the only people who kind of think like us sometimes are us. There's other professions that think like us, but we're masters of the gray. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. What I like people to know when they're coming into our profession is that, you should know that there are some risks and some benefits. And one of the risks is social workers see some of the deepest horrors of human experience. There is no doubt that if you practice this profession, you will meet people who are just in situations of just utter despair and sometimes terrible dread, and just what I'll call horror. Now, that being said, you have to be prepared and be ready to enter into that despair and horror and anger and fear to be able to help your fellow man. The good news is that while you see all this dark stuff, you'll also have the opportunity to experience such wonderful strengths that human beings have, and the amazing resilience of the human spirit. I've had clients who have taught me, to face the depths of evil, but also just celebrate the mountains of joy.
And that I think that's, like I said, that's what I loved about this book, was it really captured, as the title says, the art and soul of social work. It talked about the humorous moments. It talked about the moments where you're sort of saying, oh my goodness, this is horror that I'm viewing. And you saw that resilience, as you said, of the human spirit. And you capture that all in the book. And I think, as especially as we're going, people who've been in the profession for some years, reading something like this helps you sort of reflect on your own career. And really say, okay, this is other social workers are going through something similar, and here's sort of an outlet for me to read this and be inspired.
How validating and how wonderful. It strikes me that each and every one of us is probably this book. There's nothing new about this book. Every social worker in the world could write this book. We're all filled with these stories, and if the book at any level sorts to help people open up themselves to their own stories, then gee, that was worth it. But we're all filled with wonderful stories that we've all engaged with our clients.
Yeah, I know, and I'm so glad that you actually took this to paper. So many times social workers, we have all this information, but it's not shared, so sometimes we feel sort of isolated, as you were saying, because we don't know if other people are going through these same feelings, emotions, experiences that we are. Yet when we read your book, it's like, okay, someone else has gone there, and hopefully that will inspire some other people to read and to write, and even if it's not in the main level for writing a book, maybe they can share it with colleagues and just to really talk and have these sort of debriefs about, this is what's going on. This is something that has happened to me today.
One of the things that I think we need to do more of, and by we, I mean we in the social work profession, is is that we do, I make a comment that sometimes we live a life of the lone wolf in a way. We're always engaged with our clients in either individuals or small groups or communities, and we're always giving it away. And by that is, we enter into the space and we encourage and we enable people to empower themselves. But you can't grow a flower. You just set up the conditions for a flower to grow, and so we celebrate. I don't know. We're kind of like society's fertilizer in a way. we. So anyway, when you walk away from great if it's a successful episode. When you walk away from the Ladies Chowder Society and they've solved their problems that night and they all feel like sliced bread, you're going to drive home and you're going to go, yeah, boy, I felt that's so great. But nobody else really, except your colleagues, is ever going to understand what it is you did or how it is that you did it. And so, like, if you go in the next day and someone says, yeah, well, how was it last night with the Ladies Chowder Society? And you go, I was in the zone. It really worked out really well, and they've really come a long way, and they're going to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. And it's so cool when that colleague looks you in the eye and just goes, oh, yeah, isn't that cool when that happens? And that's social work. And when you're doing it, it really does. It's almost an experience of being outside yourself. It's larger than life. And I think, actually, we all need to take time and really do validate other people's experience of practicing their profession.
If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Dr. Ogden Rogers, author of the book Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, Sideways Stories on the Art and Soul of Social Work. Dr. Rogers, if you have a few more minutes, we'd like to take a quick break for a public service announcement and then ask you a few more questions.
Oh, that would be terrific.
We'll be right back.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends.
In biology,
In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes
In
me.
biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today
The only thing I didn't learn today
the only thing I didn't learn
Is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov. A message from the Ad Council.
Welcome back to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
That's right. Welcome back to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany. My name is Eric Hardiman. I'm here with my co-host Alyssa Lotmore and social work graduate student Lamar Romeo. Our special guest today is Dr. Ogden Rogers, author of Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, Sideways Stories on the Art and Soul of Social Work. Welcome back.
So what I would like to do is just read a quick quote from your book. You write, that the moment you create a box, there's an inside and an outside of the box. The social worker will be very happy to explore the inside, but will, by nature, also explore the outside. What is out there? Another box? Yes. And another, and another, and another. When you start to think like a social worker, it will sometimes separate you from the way a lot of other people think. I want you to be prepared for this, you say, for young social workers. It can get lonely and frankly heavy. You will never see the world the same once you start to appreciate the gray. What advice would you give for some of our more fledgling social workers?
Oh, boy, what a good question. I think one has to come into this profession beginning to ask oneself some really soul-searching questions about what brings you here. why, a lot of you want to help people, but like, why do you want to help people? There are so many ways to live life, and to make a commitment to this profession, I think, really requires being rather courageous of yourself, to be able to ask questions that reveal to you the strengths that you have, but also the challenges that you experience. So that's the first thing. I think I would tell fledgling social workers that they have to be courageous about looking at themselves. The other thing is that life is about experiencing the wonders and the joys and the triumphs and the tragedies of this experience. So I tell people that they need to become spectators and participants of all the things that you can experience. People should have a world outside of their social work that they can compare and contrast their social work with. Music, art, sport, whatever floats your boat. But I really encourage people to have an active vocational life outside of their professional life. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And there are some books and some experiences that has actually helped to change the trajectory of my life. And I can honestly say that this is another book. Like, this is a must read. And I'm glad that I actually had a moment to actually sit down and read this book. Totally changed me.
Oh, Lamar, you must have been paid by my publisher.
You know what? And Ogden, I would like to say that he's honest. He came to my office when I told him you were gonna be on, and he hadn't read your book yet. And I said, well, it's in the library. Go check out a copy. And about 2 days later, he came back and he said, that was amazing book. I want my own copy. Like, this is great. So I think that's he was even recommending to some of our professors that it's incorporated in our reading for the course. But it really, I think it's sort of going around our campus now, especially since people found out you were going to be on, and people are talking about it. And I think that's one of the good things about this book is it's a book that makes people talk. It makes people say, hey, this is something that I think social workers should be reading. This is something that connected with me. Maybe it will connect with you too. So students are sharing it, faculty are sharing it, and I think the fact that that's happening is really great, because it's showing that this book is something that is inspiring and making people talk.
Well, that's cool, but you know what? That's the profession. I mean, our profession is inspiring, and we just need to find every vehicle we can in our day-to-day lives with each other as colleagues to just open those stories up and to explore and reach out and validate the wonderful things that we do, and oh, by the way, the horrible things that we do as well. But we are, one of the powers of this profession is the fact that it's a social profession, and we really need to. I'm really pleased to hear what's going on your campus, and I can only, say that's the kind of stuff that we should be doing every day in every venue where we practice our profession.
So tell us, Ogden, what's next for you? Do you have another book project in the future? Do you have future plans that might interest us?
Oh, I don't know of anything. I do have another book in the works. In fact, I haven't even told my publisher about it.
And she's learning about it now, probably.
probably. And like, it's like any other piece of art. It's just kind of, I'm just playing with it right now. But yeah, I'm hoping I've got another book in me.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that.
Can you give our listeners possibly a website? Is there a website where listeners can find out more about your book and possibly find out where to purchase it?
Yeah, there is a website. It's a Google world. I think if you just Google beginnings, middles, and ends, you'll probably come to my website, or not my website. It's my publisher's website. Beginnings, Middles, and Ends. Where is it? Luckily for you, Eric, I'm sitting right here at the computer.
So for those of you listening, the title of the book, again, is Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, Sideways Stories on the Art and Soul of Social Work. And you've been listening to the author of this book, Ogden Rogers.
The website is Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, all one big long word, .com.
Well, there you go. That's easy. Beginningsmiddlesandends.com. You can find out more about the book, more about Ogden Rogers, and we will look forward to your upcoming projects and hopefully future books that we can learn from. Thank you for being our guest today. We loved hearing your stories, hearing about how you came up with the idea for the book and how you've really started to make an impact on the profession.
It was so grand to meet all of you, and I really do give you my best wishes for this effort that you're doing on the radio and on your campuses and in the profession. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Ogden. And for those who want to find out more or hear this episode again, if they want to hear it again or want to share it with friends who may have missed it, it will be available on YouTube, on our Social Workers Radio Talk Show channel. We'll also put it on our Facebook page, our Twitter pages, the links to that YouTube, the YouTube show. So hopefully you'll share with friends and family so we can get the word out.
You've been listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in January. We don't have a date yet, but we will let you know when that's coming up for the next show. Thank you for listening.